I would say two things. My husband and I both graduated from Wheaton College and had a really good experience there. And my brother-in-law graduated from Bethel. And once I started grad school, I was pretty confident I wanted to end up teaching at a Christian liberal arts school like Bethel, like Wheaton. And my husband and I liked the idea of not having to move. So that was one of the things that brought me here. And then the other thing is a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me in my grad program, she was on the job market. She applied for and was offered a job at Bethel, but she was offered another job that she took instead. And so she told the person who was the dean at the time, hey, I know someone who isn't finished yet, but I think would be a good fit at Bethel. And I was 8 months pregnant and didn't feel ready to be applying, but decided it would be a good practice interview. And then they offered me the job, and I've been teaching here ever since. So I've been on the faculty the whole time, but I think of my career at Bethel kind of in three pieces. When I started at Bethel, my title was Director of Writing Across the Curriculum. That was kind of a big thing in like the 1980s and 90s at a lot of universities. And I worked with, I gave oversight to the college writing, the freshman comp class. And then I also worked with faculty across disciplines to help them think about how they might use writing as a learning tool in their classes. And also, no matter what a person is majoring in, they have to write some papers at various times. And so helping to prepare those faculty to help students, basically to support and coach students. So that was a big chunk of what I did, probably for about my first 10 years. That kind of morphed into, I was the faculty development coordinator at Bethel for probably 8 or 10 years. And so that broadened out beyond just writing. So I would help to lead new faculty orientation, would regularly watch faculty during their first 1 or 2 years, watch them teach, and then give them some feedback about their teaching, and then also plan and facilitate workshops, faculty development things, which is like what I did at the collaboration that I had worked with before. And then I'd say for about the last 15 or so years, I haven't been doing any of those things anymore. I've been more squarely teaching in the English department. And then also I'm one of the people who's been on the teaching team for the humanities program since it was a twinkle in Dan Ritchie's eye. So I've been teaching, humanities has been part of what I teach, plus lit and writing classes in the English department. I have been what was then called faculty moderator. And then when we reorganized the CAS faculty governance system, 15 years ago-ish, we have a faculty senate now. So I've been a senator, I've been on Senate steering, I've then also been the 3-year commitment of being Senate VP president and past president. And then I've been on twice. I was on the search committee to choose a provost. I was on the committee that chose Deb Harless to be provost. And then most recently on the committee that chose Robin to be the provost. And I've been on, I think one of the things about having known Deb Harless for such a long time is when she was here, she would every couple of years ask me to be on some ad hoc initiative or committee or whatever. When I started teaching at Bethel, having graduated from Wheaton, I felt like I had a pretty good idea of what it would be like to be here. And in a lot of ways, I think my perceptions were correct. I knew that Bethel would be a place that takes teaching and learning really seriously and sees learning as a whole person enterprise, which means that faculty need to think about not just their discipline, but how their discipline connects with their own faith, their own understandings of theology, and how that connects with their students. So I was really pleased to see that Bethel cared about that just like Wheaton had cared about it. I'm not Baptist, and I expected Bethel to feel less broad than Wheaton had felt to me, just because Wheaton isn't affiliated with one particular denomination. And that has not been my experience. I think even though Bethel is squarely connected with what's now Converge, and at times that, that hasn't made as much of a difference to me as a faculty person as I thought that it might. When I started teaching at Bethel, I was kind of waiting for my phone to ring and having it be a former prof that I had known from the English department at Wheaton, begging me to come and teach there once I finished my PhD, because I thought, yeah, Bethel's nice, but Wheaton's better. Wheaton has money that Bethel doesn't have. Wheaton, therefore, can be more selective than Bethel can be. So, I mean, there are some good things about Wheaton, but the longer I've been here, the more I've come to appreciate things about Bethel admits a lot of students that Wheaton would never consider, and I think often that has turned out to be a good thing in giving people a chance who maybe had a rough go of it for one reason or another in high school. When I started at Bethel, we were on a pretty steep growth curve, both in terms of number of faculty who were being hired and number of students who were coming in. My very first year at Bethel, every time we had a faculty meeting, people who'd been around for a while would talk about how hard it had been to be here 7 or 8 years before I started, because there had been a time when Bethel first moved to this campus when they grew too quickly, and there were students who didn't feel that they were being very well cared for. Classrooms were like literally too crowded, and then things kind of went downhill. And so when I started, it was a couple years after that, and things were back heading in a good direction. Since Bethel is so tuition driven, the more students we have, the more money we have available. And so, like, when I started at Bethel, the building we're sitting in right now didn't exist. A lot of the buildings and a lot of the hallways that run perpendicular to the main hallway didn't exist. And so it was exciting to see all of this growth. I don't remember for sure how many people were hired the year I was hired, but it was, I want to say 15 to 20. And there were several years in a row where that's how many new faculty there were each year. So it was, so there was a lot that was really exciting, and it seemed like Bethel could really go in exciting places. And the last few years have, in a lot of ways, been like what I had heard from older faculty, what things had been like when Bethel first moved here. Less money available, more clashes between faculty and administration, because when there isn't much money, decisions will be made that not everybody is very happy about. Ever since I started, there certainly have been efforts made by each department who's hiring someone to diversify the faculty in their department. So if that department is education or nursing, the efforts were to not only hire women. When I started at Bethel, the ed department was close to 100% women. The nursing department was literally 100% women. I think English department was about 50-50. I'm pretty sure there were no women in philosophy, for example. I don't think any women were teaching in the history department when I started, just to name some departments I know. There were a couple women in psych. I think related to women on the faculty, the biggest thing that I've noticed is a change. When I started, I was literally the youngest full-time faculty person the first year I started. I was 26. But there were also even over the next few years, there were very few women faculty who had young children. The women on the faculty either were single or had waited until their kids were in school before they then did their grad degrees and started teaching. And there were a few men on the faculty who had young kids at home, but almost all of them had wives who were at home with the kids. So that's been a very noticeable change in the time that I've been here. Tricia Brownlee was the dean when I started. Tricia's not married, doesn't have kids, but she's one of the people I would name as having been patient and encouraging and kind of doing all she could to make it possible for things to go well for me here. I have a lot of female colleagues who over the years have talked about times when students, especially male students, have given them a hard time on anonymous teaching evaluations, or at other times for kind of how dare you leave your children to be watched by someone else while you're working, that kind of attitude. I've never had it, no one has ever said that to me. And maybe, I don't know if students thought I was a little bit scary, or I don't know. I think maybe they perceived that I wouldn't receive that very well. So when I started at Bethel, I have two kids. When I started at Bethel, my daughter was 2 months old. And I just kind of decided from the beginning that I was going to sort of live this life of doing everything at the same time and having a young child and working and finishing my PhD. I was going to do that pretty publicly. And I didn't have anyone setting an example for me of what that might look like. But I figured that I just assumed it would be important for students to see what that might look like, so then they could decide if they wanted to have a life like I was trying to have. And then my son was born 5 years later during spring break. Yeah, so Tricia was, like I said already, Tricia was dean when I started, so she was one of the people I had the most contact with. Kathy Nevins was on the committee that hired me. And so she was literally either the first person from Bethel that I met face-to-face, or at least really close to the first person that I met face-to-face. And I know that over the course of Kathy's career, I know that she would say that kind of every year she would think of who might be one or two younger women faculty that she wanted to kind of take under her wing and mentor. And I don't think she ever used those words with me, but as I look back on it, it's pretty obvious that that's kind of what our relationship was like at the beginning. We were both on the Gen Ed committee at the beginning. A lot of the work I did with writing across the curriculum, and then with faculty development, Kathy and I connected with. So I would definitely say Kathy. Mary Ellen Ashcroft, who hasn't been at Bethel in a while, she was in the English department. She and I overlapped by maybe a dozen or so years. Her office was right next door to mine. And she's probably about 10 years older than I am. I started at Bethel before she did, but I've always had a lot of respect for kind of looking at her and seeing, oh, her kids are older than mine. She's been sort of doing life and doing academics longer than I have. It seemed like things were working pretty well for her, so we would often kind of talk about how's that going. Once my daughter was entering adolescence, and I had some concerns about how that would go. Mary Ellen was one of the people that I would always talk to. Hang on one second. I wanted to make sure I didn't forget people. Deb Harless. Deb and I are almost exactly the same age. She started teaching at Bethel, I think 2 years after I did. But anyway, she's one of the people, kind of seeing her go into administration and sort of watching her grow in that direction was helpful for me to see as I thought about, do I want to go in that direction for part of my career or not? And then Lucy Johnson in the psych department. I don't know Lucy all that well, but there were a couple of years in which we would often have lunch together. And I just feel like I learned a lot from her about just sort of doing life. I was feeling really stressed out one day. I don't even remember what the topic was. And she just kind of looked me in the eye and she said, you know what? Anything worth doing is worth doing badly. And she was just kind of trying to reassure me that it's okay if a class doesn't go well, or if something else doesn't go well. If it's something you feel you ought to do, you should do it anyway. And I think I needed to hear that. George Brushaber was president when I started. I've always been probably more self-confident than I should be. And I think my attitude at the beginning, George was, well, he had graduated from Wheaton also. And I just remember when I was faculty moderator, and I had been here, I don't know, 10 or a dozen years at that point. And there were times when I was really unhappy with decisions he had made, and I wouldn't even make an appointment. I would just go straight in his office and talk to him. And I never felt that he treated me differently than he would have had I been a man. Bethel didn't have a maternity leave policy until just a few, like literally just a few months ago. And because I had a child during the school year, the fact that Bethel didn't have a maternity leave policy meant that I was treated differently than my husband would have been if he'd been the employee. Here's a story I want to tell. I don't know exactly where this story fits, but I just want to tell it anyway. So receiving a printed copy of the annual catalog used to be kind of a big deal. The day that the catalog was going to be put in people's P.O. boxes, we would like rush down there. Deb Harless and I had coffee together that morning. We went to check the P.O.s, and there used to be a lot more photos inside of the catalog than there are now. So we would always look, it's like getting the yearbook. We would look to see, are there pictures of either of us or of any of our friends? And we just kind of looked through it really quickly and noticed, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but there were probably 30 photos in the whole catalog that had at least one faculty person in them. And literally out of all of those, only one of those included a female faculty person. And that was a shot of a panel of people. So, you know, there's like 4 people. One of them happens to be a woman who used to teach in the art department. And I was really upset about this and happened to, I don't remember exactly who was at lunch that day. Deb Harless was at lunch. Mike Holmes, who used to teach in BTS, was there that day. And a person, I'm going to throw this person under the bus, so I'm not going to say their name, but a person who used to be in administration who doesn't work here anymore. So we're talking about the catalog, and I started to cry, which felt very embarrassing anyway. And I just said, and I told the story about, you know, how underrepresented women faculty are. And this person who used to teach, used to work here, said, well, there's so many decisions that the people who make the catalog have to make. Like, they're trying to make sure that it doesn't look like we're only a bunch of white people. And he kind of named the things that they needed to pay attention to. And Mike looked this guy square in the eye and said, there is no excuse for underrepresenting women faculty that way. And Mike said, by putting a lot of students of color in the catalog, especially since at the time you couldn't quite count on one hand the number of students of color, but anyway, there weren't many. By putting a lot of students of color in the catalog, Bethel was communicating, this is what we want Bethel to be like. And we're not choosing to do it that way with women on the faculty. And I very much appreciated Mike at that time. I think I was thinking about the fact that it honestly, given the perspective of some people in Converge and in some of the other churches and denominations that are connected with Bethel, I was really surprised that Sherry Mortensen was in campus ministries and that Laurel Bunker was in campus ministries. I don't know what kind of battles had to be fought behind closed doors about that, but I know that both of those two women were criticized simply because they were women and they were preaching. I wouldn't really call this a transition, but it has always bothered me that Bethel is not willing to take a particular stand on women's issues, especially when it comes to women, the possibility of women going to seminary and being ordained. And in fact, I know that BTS in CAS has received criticism from above for the fact that they have chosen as a department to try not to hire faculty unless those faculty support women in pastoral ministry. And what I don't understand is we will accept students into programs that are clearly preparing them for ministry. But we feel like we have to say, can't we all just get along and disagree on that one? I mean, that's just a particular issue that doesn't get a lot of public airtime, but I kind of wish would get more public airtime outside of classrooms taught by BTS faculty. I think it was irrelevant to the choice. In that particular case, we narrowed it down to 3 people, and all 3 of those people were already employed here. And 2 were women, Deb obviously being one of them. Jay was president and was very supportive of the candidates we had narrowed it down to, and was very supportive of Deb. Yeah, it just never, okay, I don't remember what we said at the time. Here's just what I would say now. Temperamentally, she is, at least outwardly, pretty unflappable. I've been in a whole bunch of situations where it was clear that she and I disagreed, or when, like at Faculty Senate or that sort of thing. She kept her cool admirably. I think one of the biggest things I appreciate about Deb is her absolute honesty and integrity. She sometimes would frustrate people because if somebody would come to her with a request, she would listen carefully, she would take notes, and she wouldn't give an answer right then. And in fact, sometimes would take days or even weeks before giving an answer. That people have found frustrating. But she always closed the loop. She she really, really worked hard not to commit to something unless she was sure that she could follow through on that. So I really appreciated that about her, and I appreciated her willingness to reconsider a decision. So when Bethel first purchased the Anderson Center, the initial plans were to have some CAS classes and departments be there, and some CAS classes and departments remain here. And I think really close to, it was practically unanimous among the faculty, you've got to be kidding, that's a really bad idea for these 85 reasons. And Deb Harless and Deb Sullivan Traynor, who was the associate provost, they were both convinced that we couldn't all fit here, and that we had to split things, but they were both willing to say, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, let's imagine that it's not traditional undergrad that's going to go over to Anderson. How else might we ease the space crunch here and use that building? Anyway, the willingness to reconsider, I think, speaks volumes. Not everyone in that position would be willing to reconsider. Well, Deb would be one, since she started on the faculty. Deb Sullivan Traynor started out on the faculty and became a associate dean and then associate provost. Several other, Susan Brooks, who's not here anymore, was on the English department faculty and then became chair. She and I were co-chairs of the English department for a couple of years. Sarah Shady has stepped into a bunch of leadership roles. She was one of the people that led a Gen Ed revision task force. Gosh, I guess a long time ago. So I can think of a whole bunch of women faculty who started out, Bethel was maybe their first real job. And then after a couple of years, they were either asked to or volunteered to lead a committee or be in charge of a task force. And I think that's another thing I've appreciated about Bethel. I think probably in contrast to Wheaton, I have always been surprised by how relatively egalitarian Bethel is among faculty. I had been working here 4 years before I finished my PhD, and when I defended my dissertation, nobody treated me differently. And I was disappointed at the time, but then I realized that says a lot about how well people treated me before. So that's not a male-female thing, it's just I have a couple of friends who teach at other schools who said that, like, when faculty are lining up for graduation or convocation, that sort of thing, it's a really big deal. Like, people with PhDs get to process before people who have other kinds of doctoral degrees, and then procession, how long have you been here? Are you tenured? Like, what the order in which you process is a really big deal, and that's never been a big deal here. No, I'm sure I wasn't the first. I could name a couple other people who were moderator. Deb Harless was faculty moderator a year or two before I was. Kathy Nevins was faculty moderator. And I'm sure there were a couple other people that, yeah. Yeah, I think when I started on the faculty, I think it would be safe to say that in most departments, people who had recently done grad school, that was on people's radar, like, hey, we should pay more attention to what authors we're assigning, what issues we're looking at in class. So I think when I started, it was initially yeah, we should do this. Kind of like we should not just it shouldn't just be dead white guys that we're studying. And I think in my own department, I would say up until really a couple of years ago, that like there's been individuals on the faculty who would make that a very big deal. We used to have a like women's literature class or something like that, and then, but that's kind of an artifact of, you know, there's like lady lit, and then there's the real serious canonical stuff that we're going to read. So thankfully, that died away pretty quickly. But we've made a lot of changes to our curriculum the last couple of years because of the number of faculty cuts we've had. So we had to redesign our whole curriculum. And so that means that a bunch of classes that all of us in our department are teaching right now are classes that didn't even exist a few years ago. And that's a perfect time to say, you know, let's put our thoughts into act. Anyway, let's make sure that we're reading a wider variety of people, not just when it comes to gender, but when it comes to race, ethnicity, cultural background. In some ways, that's a hard question to answer because this is the only place I've ever been a faculty person. So I think about what Wheaton felt like to me when I was there, but I was a student there. I was raised in a home and in a church where being a strong woman was being self-confident, being smart, going to grad school, all of that was like, I think my parents would have been surprised and disappointed had I not gone on to grad school. But I remember I was pretty close to finishing my dissertation, finishing my classwork. We didn't have any kids yet. And my mom said, you know, you and Dave should get a dog. And I said, why? And she said, well, you've worked so hard on your PhD. It would be a shame for you to work so hard and then have a baby and then stay home. So you should get a dog instead. And my parents used to cut articles out of Lord knows where they found them about how kids who are raised with fathers who are deeply involved in their, like not just raised by their moms, things they're confused, they're going to be sexually confused, and kids who are raised going to daycare. Anyway, so on the one hand, there was a lot of pressure from both of my parents to go to grad school, but certainly not to work and have my kids be in daycare. But at the same time, they would brag to their friends about what I was doing. So that's and I remember the church that we went to for a little while when our daughter was tiny. We went to the church, Evangelical Free Church, that my husband had grown up in. And people were sweet and really nice there, but I remember like the Sunday before I was going to start working at Bethel, several people that we knew in our Sunday school class said, I'm so sorry your husband doesn't make enough money for you guys to live on one income. Like I got pity from people. The assumption was I wouldn't be working otherwise. I've never gotten those messages directly from anyone here. I'm sure that there are some students that I've had who think that sort of thing, but they've never said it to me. One of the biggest changes I've seen in my time at Bethel, and this doesn't say anything about Bethel specifically, this is about higher ed in the last 30 years, especially higher ed for people in arts and humanities. Early on in my time at Bethel, I was very deliberate about seeking out the couple of students in each of my classes who were clearly grad school material. And I'd be like, have you ever thought of going to grad school? I could see you being a college professor. I could see you, and I wouldn't exclusively single out women students, but often I would. And now I actively talk people out of grad school. Or at least I say, you tell me you want to get a PhD in English, is money an issue? Because you sure as anything shouldn't borrow to go to work on a PhD in English. Can you accept the fact that there's a really good chance you won't get hired to do a job that requires that kind of background? Like if you just love this so much you want to keep doing it, I'll support you, I'll write you a bang-up letter, and I'll help you find a good place to do it. But that's been, I think, one of the things that's been the hardest about being a faculty person during the window of time in which I have been is when I started, not just here, there were jobs to be had. It was kind of exciting to be in higher ed. And now, kind of wondering what's going to be the next school that's going to close its doors. Bethel certainly feels and looks different now than it did when I started in terms of, when I started, there were about 100 English majors every year. And we just this last year graduated 13, and I think that's the biggest class we're likely to have for a long time. I mean, that's just an example. And Bethel is far from unique, but it's hard to feel energized and supported. And I don't blame the administration for this, but like I have more positive feelings toward past Bethel administration because I felt more supported. And I know that a big part of it is because there was money for Deb Harless and George Breshover and Jay Barnes to say yes to almost anything. If it was a good idea, they'd be like, yeah, take 8 students to go do this. And that's just really demoralizing. There, let the record show that. One of the things I appreciate about the current Bethel leadership is their willingness to take risks, hoping that those risks will pay off financially. So, for example, let's have a lot more PSEO students. Let's have there be more this one Bethel idea. Let's have there be fewer silos, not just CAS, adult programs, seminary, and grad school, but what might it look like to have a Bethel where that's all united? Those are all gambles. And so I guess one of my hopes is that those gambles will pay off. I hope that enough of the PSEO students that come here will decide that they're going to stick around after they have finished high school. Because if enough of them will do that, that will help, well, that'll help everything. I'm going to sound like some Pollyanna person. I hope that someone, every once in a while, my daughter graduated from Gustavus, and several years ago, I saw in the news that some wealthy alum had given Gustavus, I don't know, $8 or $10 million. Like, surely there are people that like Bethel that would give us money, and I would love to see that money go toward arts and humanities. We need resources that will help us counteract some of the negative societal pressures. Anyway, so I hope that. I would really like to see Bethel follow the path that some other solidly and pervasively Christian schools have followed. and open its doors a little more widely. We already, and I think in two particular ways. One is we already, with PSEO students, can't ask, are you a Christian or are you not? And so we admit a small number of students who are from different religious traditions, I think especially Muslim students. And some of those students want to stay here when they finish. So I would like to see Bethel change its admissions policies for undergrad students. And I would like to believe that it may be possible in the not too distant future for Bethel to have an institutional policy on something like same-sex relationships, but that policy can allow for more diversity of thought on that issue among employees and students.